Welcome to Talk Testimonies. We cut through the legal jargon to bring you the core of Supreme Court decisions.
Glad to be here.
Today we're diving into a case called Yovino v. Rizo.
Right.
And the big question was, can a federal court actually count the vote of a judge who died before the decision was officially issued?
Seems straightforward, but definitely has layers.
So, spoiler alert, the Supreme Court basically said no to that.
That's the bottom line. They held the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals messed up by including the vote of Judge Stephen Reinhardt.
Because he had passed away before the decision came out.
Exactly, before it was formally issued. And this was a per curiam ruling, from the court as a whole.
No single author listed.
Right. Though Justice Sotomayor did write separately, concurring in the judgment, but maybe with slightly different reasoning points.
Okay, so the headline is pretty clear. A deceased judge's vote is a no-go. But how did this even become an issue? What was the case actually about originally?
Well, the underlying case started quite differently. It was brought by Aileen Rizzo. She sued the Fresno County Superintendent of Schools. She alleged violations of the Equal Pay Act.
So an equal pay dispute.
Yes, she argued she was being paid less than her male colleagues for the same essential work. The district court initially denied the county's motion for summary judgment.
Meaning the case could proceed?
Right. So the county appealed that decision up to the Ninth Circuit.
And this is where the path gets a little, complicated.
Yeah, you could say that. A standard 3-judge panel at the Ninth Circuit first sided with the county. They relied on an older Ninth Circuit case, Cuba v. Allstate Insurance.
Okay.
But then the Ninth Circuit decided to rehear the case en banc.
Right, en banc. Remind us what that means again.
Sure. So instead of just the 3 judges, a much larger group of judges from that circuit court reviews the case.
And they usually do that for big, important legal questions or if there are conflicting rulings within the circuit. Right?
Exactly. The fact they went en banc here really signals that the issues around the Equal Pay Act and how that Cuba precedent applied were, pretty significant to them.
Got it. So the full court takes another look. And
then we hit the really unique circumstance. Judge Stephen Reinhardt, who was a very long-serving and frankly prominent judge on the Ninth Circuit, he sadly passed away. That was on March 29th, 2018.
Okay.
But then the Ninth Circuit issued its en banc decision in Rizo's case on April 9th, 2018. That's 11 days after Judge Reinhardt's death?
11 days later.
And Judge Reinhardt was listed as the author of the majority opinion.
Wait, the judge who had passed away was listed as the author. How did they explain that?
Well, they included a footnote in the opinion.
Okay, what does the footnote say?
It basically said that Judge Reinhardt had fully participated in the case, he wrote the opinion, and crucially, that the voting by the en banc panel was actually completed before he died.
So their argument was essentially, look, the work was done, the votes were cast, it was finalized internally before he passed.
That seems to be the gist of it. Like the formal release was just, a formality after the substance was settled.
But the Supreme Court, they didn't quite see it that way.
No, not at all. They found that whole practice inconsistent with, fundamental judicial principles and long-established practices.
In what way?
They really emphasized that judges need to be able to change their minds, revise their drafts, respond to colleagues' points.
Right up until the moment it's officially released to the public.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The idea that a vote is somehow locked in stone before that public release, the Supreme Court just didn't find any real precedent or procedure supporting that.
That makes sense. The deliberation process is ongoing. Freezing it at death seems odd.
It cuts the process short, yeah. And the court pointed to its own precedent. There was a case called United States v. American Foreign Steamship Corporation.
Okay, what happened there?
In that case, a judge had taken senior status, that's sort of semi-retirement for federal judges, before an en banc opinion was issued.
Right.
And the Supreme Court said that judge couldn't be counted in the majority because they weren't technically an active judge anymore when the decision was finalized and issued.
I see the parallel. So the Supreme Court was saying Judge Reinhardt, having passed away, was obviously not an active judge.
Not even a senior judge. He simply wasn't holding any judicial office when the Rizzo decision actually came out.
So he lacked the power to participate at that specific moment.
That's precisely what the court said. His judicial power ended with his life. They also looked at the actual statute governing the Courts of Appeals, Title 28, Section 46 of the U.S. Code.
Okay, Section 46. What did that add?
Well, they looked at subsection C, about on-bank courts, but also subsection D, which talks about quorums for the regular three-judge panels.
Quorums, the minimum number of judges needed.
Right. And Section 46D says that if a panel judge dies or retires after a case has been argued or submitted, the remaining two judges, if that's a majority, can still decide the case.
Okay.
But the Supreme Court read that as implicitly requiring that the judges who are deciding must be alive and serving at the time the decision is actually handed down. The provision allows a smaller group to finish, but assumes those finishers are, well, living judges.
So the mechanism works, but only with judges who currently hold the office.
Exactly. And the court also noted a lack of precedent for the Ninth Circuit's approach. They said they weren't aware of any binding decision from a court of appeals that was joined by less than a quorum of living judges at the time of release.
Any exceptions at all?
They did mention one other Ninth Circuit case, Altera Corp v. Commissioner. It seems that one was initially issued after Judge Reinhardt's death with his vote counted. But the Ninth Circuit itself later withdrew that decision.
That withdrawal is telling. Suggests maybe even they had second thoughts about the practice.
It certainly could suggest that, but the Supreme Court's main point was really fundamental.
Which was?
Federal judges are appointed for life, yes, but not for eternity.
Life, not eternity. That's a clear line.
And counting a deceased judge's vote, in their view, allows the exercise of judicial power after that power has ceased to exist. It has to be tied to actively holding the office when the decision becomes official.
So, no ambiguity. The judge has to be on the bench, so to speak, when the gavel falls.
That's a good way to put it. So the conclusion was clear. The Ninth Circuit erred. They shouldn't have counted Judge Reinhardt's vote.
And the final disposition. What happened to the Rizo case itself?
The Supreme Court agreed to hear the case. Then they vacated the Ninth Circuit's judgment.
Wiped it off the books.
Essentially, yes. Yep. And they remanded it, sent it back down to the Ninth Circuit.
With instructions.
Yes, instructions to conduct further proceedings consistent with the Supreme Court's opinion. Basically, figure it out again, but without counting Judge Reinhardt's vote this time.
Okay, let's zoom out. What's the bigger significance here? Why should folks care about this beyond this one specific, rather unusual situation?
Well, it provides really important clarity on the timing issue. When exactly does a judge's participation become locked in? The answer is, at the moment of official issuance, and only if they are still a judge then.
Especially for these on-bank panels.
Especially then, yes. It strongly reinforces that basic principle. Judicial power is exercised by living judges holding office.
And the court got there by looking at the statute, Section 46.
Right, statutory interpretation.
And also looking back at judicial practice and that American foreign steamship precedent.
Correct. It reaffirms those temporal boundaries. And, there's a ripple effect, too.
How so?
Remember, the underlying issue was the Equal Pay Act. The Ninth Circuit's big on-bank ruling on that depended on Judge Reinhardt's vote for its majority.
So because his vote is now invalid, that whole on-bank opinion on the Equal Pay Act issue is gone.
It's vacated. Its precedential value, at least from that specific ruling, evaporated. The Ninth Circuit has to revisit its stance on those substantive EPA questions now.
Wow, so a procedural ruling has a major potential impact on the actual law in that circuit.
Absolutely. Shows how procedure and substance are often intertwined.
Fascinating. Okay, this brings us nicely to our segment, The 10th Chair. This is where we, talk testimonies, put on our hypothetical robe and act as the 10th justice. So, sitting in that 10th chair for Yovino v. Rizo, what's our call?
Sitting as the 10th chair, talk testimonies would also vote to vacate the judgment of the Ninth Circuit and remand the case, aligning with the actual court here.
Okay, so vacate and remand, and the reasoning behind that hypothetical judgment.
Well, it really comes down to the integrity of the whole judicial process. It seems fundamental that only people actually holding judicial office when a decision is finalized and issued can be counted.
Anything else feels wrong.
It undermines the very definition of judicial power. You can't wield power you no longer possess. And the existing framework, 28 U.S.C. Section 46, and the American foreign precedent, they both point strongly in this direction.
So it avoids instability.
Exactly. Allowing a deceased judge's vote just muddies the waters. When is a decision final? Who decided it? Our ruling reinforces that decisions have to reflect the judgment of a living quorum of currently serving judges. It's about clarity and legitimacy.
And the projected impact of this hypothetical 10th chair ruling?
It would just further cement that bright line. A judge's ability to participate ends when they leave office, whether by retirement, resignation, or, sadly, death. The key moment is the official issuance.
No ambiguity.
Right. It prevents precedent being built on, well, a foundation that includes someone no longer empowered to lay that foundation. It keeps court decisions clear, reliable, and legitimate. You need to know who actually made the call.
Makes perfect sense. A solid judgment from our 10th chair.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so to quickly wrap up our deep dive on Yovino v. Rizo, the key takeaway is the Supreme Court firmly stated that judicial power requires a living judge actively in office at the moment a decision is issued.
That's the core. And just the standard reminder, our analysis today, including our 10th chair judgment, is just commentary. It's for information, for discussion. It is definitely not legal advice and doesn't represent the official views or holdings of the Supreme Court.
Absolutely. We hope this breakdown was helpful. Think about it, discuss it. Thanks for tuning in to Talk Testimonies.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.